What?
No, speak up.
A little bit closer.
Okay.
I've got a button here that advances all the seats here.
This is Barnaby Edwards. He's kindly come to do a talk. He's a writer, an actor, an artist, a director. He does a bit of everything, so it should be helpful for everyone here if they're interested in that sort of thing. Lots of people here as well, so that's quite nice. Yeah. Barnaby Edwards? Yeah?
Right. Hello, and so can I be hands? Who's in the first year? Okay, and who's in the second year? And who's in the third year? Willow, I know. Yeah. Great, well, that's a very good mix. Very good mix. And who's doing writing? Okay, and who's doing sort of theatre-y performing things? Right. Right. Okay. And what other areas would there be? Television studies. Who else is doing television studies? Ah, great. You also have been in areas. I like the sort of drifts of it all. Right, okay.
So I suppose the best to start off with is what got you interested in performing and writing and theatre? What was it from the word go you thought, yes, I'm interested in writing?
I first got into theatre before I got into writing, and I think it's the same route that I did a school play, fell over and got a big laugh, and I thought, right, this is good, I can actually do something, and get people to react. So I think it was probably that kind of immodest, narcissistic thing that got me into it. And then in terms of, well, performing is very different from writing, as I'm sure you know if you do both of them. Writing is a very lonely process, even if you're writing someone else. It's a very introverted process, and it comes from within you, and it's not an extrovert process. And I think it's quite nice to have two, because when I'm performing, that gets out the extrovert bit, and when I'm writing, that gets out the introvert bit. So I think I started out being just in acting, and then I moved into more directing, and then into writing. That really sprung from directing, I think, because I started being given scripts that I didn't really like, so I secretly rewrote them, and then I became a script editor through that process, and then I did a lot of writing from that bit onwards.
So were you writing first, or were you acting first?
Definitely acting first.
Where did you train?
I went after school. I went to university for 4 years to do French and fine art, and then I went from there to do a year. I did a lot of student drama when I was there at Exeter University, and then I went and did a year at the Guildford School of Acting in a postgraduate year of getting singing, dancing, and acting. And then that was at a sort of rare phase of the world of drama schools where you got an equity card, a provisional equity card, and you left, and it's like gold dust. And now anyone can join equity, so it's utterly worthless. But yeah, that's why I went to that. It's an approved drama school, and I got that, and then I got an agent while I was at drama school, which was quite fortunate. And then from then on, I've just been doing anything that I can.
Where did your writing career officially begin, like the first paid work as a writer?
First paid work as a writer, I think, would have been writing a Doctor Who audio adventure called The Bride of Peladon, and I'd done about 10 or 12 script editing jobs before then, before I felt I could do that, and then I wrote that. That was a 2-hour drama, and yeah, so that was my first paid thing.
For anyone who's not aware, Barnaby Edwards writes for audio company Big Finish, who are only licensed to do Doctor Who audio adventures, but that's often with actors who play, Peter Davison, Tom Baker joined recently, Colin Baker. So because it's a lucrative franchise, obviously you've got all these actors still available to portray the role, and often Big Finish gets a full cast of Radio 7.
Or Radio 4 Extras.
Radio 4.
But it's it's the classic series, so it's not the new series, and it's all the old Doctors but doing new adventures, which is an interesting discipline in terms of writing, because you have to write for a pre-existing thing that may have been around in the 1970s and 1980s, and you have to write for those characters but do new adventures even though the actors may be 30 years old. So it's an interesting challenge.
So we will be focusing on one of his most recent projects, which was the Emerald Tiger, which had Peter Davison.
Yes, Peter Davison and his 1980s assistants. We had various other lovely actors like Cherry Lani and people like that.
I'll just quickly focus a bit more on the theatre.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able, when you started to actually write, have you written your own plays?
I haven't written anything for me to perform. I have rewritten considerable things for me to perform. I've done Christmas shows and things like that where the scripts are slightly more flexible. I obviously wouldn't rewrite Shakespeare, but sometimes if you're doing a Christmas show or something like that, you might think of a better gag, or a panto or something like that, you might write your own stuff for that. But yeah, I wouldn't dream of rewriting proper people's writing. But yeah, so I think it all stems out of that, and then you sort of direct your own sequences, and then basically become a megalomaniac, and that's when you have to do everything.
So what is your writing process? How do you actually force yourself to write?
Well, you get the computer, you get that blank page in front of you, you then go and watch any daytime television you can possibly manage. You then make practically any hot beverage or cold beverage you can. You go out into the garden, you do anything other than write, and eventually you have to sit down and write. And it's I find it an agonising process. The starting of it is great. I don't really have that sort of blank page thing. I can start writing it, and then as soon as you've written it, you want to rewrite it. And I think the discipline, the tricky thing to learn is you've really just got to keep going. Don't look back. It's like when you're climbing a ladder, you don't look down. Don't go back until you've finished it. Until you finish it, then you go back and you think that bit's terrible, I've got to rewrite that, or that bit's great, and obviously if it's great, you should strike it out because it'll probably be terrible. So the process, I think, for me is well, it's different. If I'm writing to a brief, I have to write a synopsis, which is a horrible thing, because it's really hard to write a synopsis of something that you haven't written. But everyone's asking you for it nowadays. Every radio station, if you say, I've got this great idea for a radio drama, they'll say, brilliant, can you write me a 150-word synopsis? And you think, I haven't written it yet. How do I know what I'm going to write until I write it? So you have to do this strange, slightly vague synopsis about what's going to happen, and there'll be a car chase here, and then a large robot will come from space and do this, and then one of the characters get killed, and then there'll be an exciting moment here. And then when you actually write it, you only stick very vaguely to a synopsis. But the process of writing a synopsis is a horrible thing to do. So you have to do that, which is like a treatment for a TV thing, where all the great ideas are there. But then when you start writing it, you have to ignore that synopsis and just let the character, I try to let the characters sort of breathe, and they sometimes go in different directions from the one that you're thinking of. And I think it helps if you, in your head, hear the dialogue, because lots of people, there's some really good writers who have terrible tin ears for dialogue. So it's always worth it just trying to hear the characters in your head and think, is that remotely naturalistic? Will the character actually speak like that? And then there's the question of sort of importing information or giving out information. You've got to give your audience enough information to know who your characters are, but without clunkily shoehorning it into your thing. Timothy West is a brilliant actor. He wrote this fantastic radio play called The Gun in My Left Hand is Loaded, which was about terrible clunky lines that you have to put in functional lines so that for the radio audience they know that that character's got a gun, things like that. And I'm always, because I write a lot for radio, I'm always up for that kind of trying to find a subtle way of doing that so that they know that that person has got a gun, because you can't, sometimes you can just do it with a click of the sound effect, but unless that sound effect is utterly recognisable, it's really hard. You can do a car starting, you don't need to say, I'm now starting the car, because people know what a car starting noise is. But there are other ones that you can't just have a door sound opening and then assume that the audience know that someone has come in. And sometimes when you get a radio script in, either as an actor or as a director that I have to direct, and just the amount of assumption that some writers put into that, they totally assume that it's utterly obvious that the person is riding a three-headed camel. And you think, no, it's not utterly obvious in sound effects that that's the case. So you have to have another character saying, what on earth is that? And then someone else saying, I don't know, it looks like some weird three-headed camel. And then eventually that'll paint a picture in someone's mind. But also I think, both in terms of writing for TV and in terms of writing for, well, in fact, theatre and radio, stage directions can be terribly important. in terms of giving both the actors who are doing it and the director who's doing it and the costume designers or whatever a feel of how it is without, George Bernard Shaw used to write massive stage directions, really precise about then 2 inches to the left of that table lamp there's a small cigarette tray that's made of half alabaster and half ormolu, and just weird massive things like that. Obviously don't go that far, but give them a feel for it, so that they'll know what kind of pace it is, and the more you can do that in your scripts, the more your vision of your world will be translatable by other people. Because don't forget, there's you, and then there are a whole load of people until there's the end process, the end thing, the finished product. And in various mediums, I'm very lucky that I get to write, direct, and produce my own stuff for radio. So I'm usually all the people in between me and them. But even then, I've got other actors I've got to work with. I've got sound designers and musicians, composers. I've got graphic designers who'll be doing the covers for it and things like that. So there are still some people between me and my vision and the end process. But if you do TV, you're going to have script editors coming in. You're going to have annoying actors coming in who don't understand your lines, who are going to rewrite them for you. So the more help you can give them in advance, the better it will be, the more vision will be translated into the finished product. So yeah, my writing process is to try and avoid it as much as possible. When I write, to try not to look back and rewrite everything, because you get that process where you start writing something and then the next day you'll come back to it and you'll start reading it from the top of what you've written. And that's fatal because you keep thinking, oh, I think another, and you just keep polishing up. So the front is really overwritten, and then by the time you get to the end, it's really rushed. So write the whole thing and then go back and play around with it.
Can you show a trailer for one of your Doctor Who videos?
Yeah, sure. Which one is it? Emerald Tiger. Right. So the Emerald Tiger, which is a thing that came out earlier this year, it's a story that I set in India, and it features Peter Davison, who's a Doctor Who in the early 1980s, and his 3 assistants from there. And it's about were-tigers, people who turn into tigers.
Come.
Okay.
That wasn't the word cock, by the way.
Ming Soon from Big Finish Productions.
On an island in the center of the valley was the temple of the Emerald Tiger, and inside, the tiger itself.
Oh, Calcutta, land of the goddess Kali. You could have shot Nissa, you idiot.
Never speak to a British officer like that, boy.
Be careful, Doctor!
Oh, why break the habit of a lifetime?
There is an evil at the center of that lost world. A heart of darkness.
Doctor, we need to move now. Something's coming. I can hear it. Something big.
This is the kingdom of the Emerald Tiger. There are no hiding places.
Lord of Jungle. Carve. Jungle does not belong to man. This is the realm of the beast. Subscribers get more at bigfinish.com.
And they'll always put an advert on the end of it. So yeah, it's a sort of mashup of got practically everything. Tarzan and The Heart of Darkness and The Passage to India, and there are I've listed it with loads of crap literary jokes and things like that. But it's a 4-part drama. It's got a cast of 12, I think, something like that, and it was recorded over 2 days. It took maybe 2 months to write. It's not writing from 9 in the morning till 9 at night, but that's allowing it to seep in and things like that. The actual physical writing was probably a month. So 2 days to direct, and then 6 weeks in post-production where they had the sound effects and the music and things like that. Yeah, so if you, we've got this is the first.
Yeah, it's the case of this. I'm not sure. Can you see that very well? Because those lights are on.
Yeah. So this is sort of what I mean about telling people in stage directions and where they are. So this is like this one here. So this is the opening thing. So I've opened it with a quotation from the Jungle Book. This is a lot of Kipling in it, the whole sort of feel. So Lady Adela, well, that's the character name. That's the character played by Cherry Longy. So she'd be reading from there, and that's got lots of lovely music underscoring it there. So I'm telling the composer to put underscoring on there. But it also tells the actress that she will have underscoring on that, so she will, in her head, think that there'll be music underneath it, so she'll give a bit more there. And then you're going, it'll fade from there into this, so it'll tell the sound designer and everyone where we are. This one says here, the Temple of the Emerald Tiger. And night, so again that will give everyone a kind of feeling for it. So then I'll give a description, an FX description, so even though it's not, you're not seeing it, I'll physically describe it, and the reason I'm physically describing it is so that the actors will know where it is and the sound designer will know where it is, and so it says here, this is a large crystal structure like Superman's Arctic home. So that's instantly people can have an idea that it's got these big geodes sticking out and quartz and things like that. It should sound mysterious and mystical, so that'll tell the sound designer that he needs to put a sort of tinkling music underneath it and create a sort of magical, weird space. Tinkle of chimes. We hear the faint pulse of the Emerald Tiger like a slow heartbeat. The Emerald Tiger, spoiler for the Emerald Tiger is a crystal that pulses. So that's a sort of, this is sort of a kind of throbbing thing that happens there. That's telling, again, the actors and the sound designer what it is. And Ayapan runs in, so that's one of the characters, panting, so again, that's so the actor knows that they don't just start it by sort of saying hello, they come in and go hello, so they know that. So, and of course I'm directing so I can tell them that, but it does, in their heads when they're reading it, it prepares them to report to Shardul Khan, and again, that's a crap joke of mine. Shardul Khan is a sort of king of darkness in Indian, and Ayapan is another Indian mythological creature. So here we'll have just some standard dialogue, and again this is probably laid out very differently from what people have seen in normal scripts, and sometimes there's a radio script way of doing it, but that courier type font and things like that I find quite unhelpful for actors, because it's a little, so don't feel that if you're doing your own project you have to stick to what it says on what's that program that does Final Draft? It doesn't have to look like Final Draft. That's only really if there's things out of TV that you have to write like that. But for radio, you can write in any way you do that's helpful for the actors. This is much more like a theatre script, which I think actors find more helpful. So yeah, character names usually in bold, and then whatever underneath. So yeah, I'll put little stage directions in here like panting slightly and evasive, that says there, and levelly. So that's a flat thing, obviously. Calm once more, so yeah, with sudden vehemence, things like that. So just those kind of things, and it gives them an idea of how they should pace the scene. And obviously, if you're directing it, you can move into more detail. And then there's again a big sort of end of thing here where it says, FX here says, they approach the Emerald Tiger, which starts pulsing louder, so they'll have the idea, so they'll also be then talking over that kind of level of sound underneath them. With a sickening crack of bone, tearing of flesh, and pained gasps, Khan and Ayapan begin transforming into ... were-tigers to roars. Now again, that just is to paint the idea of how they're doing it, because I'm getting the actors to do that without any special effects in their ears. So they won't hear any music, they won't hear any effects or anything like that, so they will have to know how to pace themselves up, and they're doing all the screens which will then effect afterwards and things like that. So this is the sort of process that I'll do, and then that will blend into the next scene, which is in the forest and things like that. So you need to, the more you can control your world, the more you can describe it to people, however fantastical it is, however it features people turning into tigers or whatever, the more you can put them completely in that world, and they know, they've got a visual image of how it is, and they sort of also know how it's going to sound, what's going to come underneath them, and the pacing of it, the more your vision of how this opening scene will go can be translated better. So it's pretty much what we were saying earlier. I think it's just, so that's how I tend to write. I don't think there's any great yeses or nos on writing, but yeah, the more you can help people understand your vision, the closer your vision will come out. Right.
Because as writers we're told, well, so the screenwriters were told, you'll write it, the director will go away and do their own thing, because sometimes you just have to let it go. So what was originally your project turns into someone else's.
Yes, that's the hardest thing.
Has their own vision, but then you have the opportunity to write and direct your own
Yeah,
projects.
but if you're, I mean, this is, I've worked on Doctor Who a lot, on the TV series of Doctor Who, 'cause I'm the guy who sits inside the Daleks. So I've done quite a lot of episodes of that, but with, you know, every script that came in from Russell T. Davies or whoever, Russell does exactly this. He does things like transforming into ... wear ties in the stage directions. And he's not directing, yes, he's producing, so he does have a certain say. But by doing that, you are subtly, hopefully, pushing the director in the way that you want them to be. So you want the directors to sort of do a dum-dum-dum, wear tigers kind of thing. And by doing that, it places the thought in the director's head. So although there are, you know, you hand over your thing and then it gets changed into something else, the more you do that, the less the director will have to do in his own head. And he might, or he or she might sort of react against it, but it's quite rare. If you can make it plain that that's a great end of episode thing by doing that, then the director will usually film it in that way. So yes, you do have to surrender control of your script, but you can do an awful lot of damage limitation before you give your script over by sort of placing these thoughts in their heads.
So did you say before how long does it take to actually record, say for example, that story?
So that's a 2-hour story. If I was doing it at the BBC, it would take 3 days, maybe 4 days, but because we do it in a specialist studio where everyone is on individual mics, all in individual sound booths, we don't have to do many pickups at all. Whereas the traditional BBC thing is that you have all around one mic. You know, you have your script and then you back off when you're not saying anything, you quietly turn your page over and then you come back in. That's actually a very laborious process. This is a throwback to the 1940s and 50s. You don't need to do that now. So I have, in the studio that I work in, I've got 6 individual booths, 6 individual microphones, 6 individual lecterns. People are on mic the whole time. They don't have to do backing off or anything like that because you can do it all with a computer now. And so the process that we have is much quicker, but it means that we can get through a 2-hour drama, recording it, in 2 days. So 2 days from 10 until 6.
So from the process of actually writing, for example, the story, to actually getting released on iTunes and the shops,
Yeah.
how long would you say that process?
That's about a year. So I'll do one of those horrible, I'll be approached to write something, they'll say what you want to write, and I think, well, I'd like to do sort of a Kipling story set in 1920s India, and it's going to have people who turn into tigers. Great, okay. So give me a synopsis. So then I have to go and I'll write that horrible thing in synopsis. That synopsis will then be given to the company Big Finish, who have the license to do Doctor Who. They will then approve that, see whether or not they like it. That then gets sent to Cardiff, where they do TV Doctor Who, for a load of BBC executives to read it through. That's another month process where they read through 150 words. And they will then say, you can't, they'll say, you can or you can't do it. And then that'll come back, it'll be given to me, I'll then write the script. Now, there's the whole thing to do with drafts and whether you're going to write draft 1 and then it'll get corrected. It does vary on what you want. I never give anyone anything other than the finished draft. Because I know writers who write, like I was saying, they'll just write from the beginning to the end and then they'll send that off and that'll be it. And then they'll wait for someone to come back with notes and then they'll do a second draft and send that off and that'll be it, and then they'll come back with notes and do that. I don't do that because my fear is always that they will accept draft 1 and that it won't have been the best of my work. And that they'll say, great, that's brilliant, let's do that draft 1. You think, well, I haven't polished any of the dialogue, I haven't done this, I haven't done that. And I have a fear that also the first time someone reads your work, that's the most memorable time for them. And that even if your draft is slightly ropey, they're going to think, great, yeah, no, you got it better than draft 1. So I give them what I would be very happy with being the final draft, being made. And then if they come back with any notes, I will adjust that and we'll come to a compromise on this or whatever. But I always fear that if you give them something that you know is not your best work and you know is not absolutely finished, then they will make it. There'll be that one time when they go, yes, we haven't got any time, it's been advanced, since your script's come in first, we're going to just make your script. And you go, well, I haven't finished it. And they go, no, it's too late, sorry, that's it, and we'll make it. So if I do have drafts, it's entirely my own business, and I redraft it until I'm happy with the finished bit. I then hand that over. The company that I work for, Big Finish, will then read that, and then they'll approve it. They'll then send it to Cardiff, who for some reason are on this desk. They'll then send it over here. Cardiff will then take a month to read it, and then they'll send it back to me. And the things that Cardiff will say sometimes are, you can't do this because we've got an episode coming up where that's happening. Or you can't do this because that doesn't fit in with the brand. There was an irritating phase where no one could drink alcohol for some reason at all in any of the audio adventures. And then Russell T Davies had the Doctor drinking lots of alcohol on TV, and then suddenly it was allowed again. Obviously, you know, hardcore sex is probably going to be sent back with you can't use this. But sometimes they'll rarely fiddle with your finished product. They will tend to fiddle with your synopsis. Several years ago, I wrote a synopsis about evil aliens that live in the ink of books and come out of a library and kill people. And they sent it back saying, you can't have that because Stephen Moffat is writing a similar story called Silence in the Library, and you've both got similar ideas. So I then had to put that on the back burner and think of something else, do another story, and then try and rework that and think of another way of doing it. It didn't sound like the Vashna Narada, which was the one that Stephen had created. So it's impossible to predict that kind of thing. You just sort of be prepared to take it back and take the knocks and then reconstruct it and bring it out as something else. But yeah, I think the important thing if I have one great piece of recommendation to you, it's don't let a piece of your work go out that you're not completely happy with in the first time. There's always room for improvement, but try and make sure it's as good as you can make it when it first goes out. So yeah, I'll come back. The script will be fully prepared for me. If I'm directing it, which I tend to direct my own work, I will then go through the casting process, which may take a month to get the right actors, and then the studio will be booked. I will go in, record it in 2 days, and then I'll spend 6 weeks with the sound designer and the musician doing the post-production. So the whole process, and then it'll be sent to a pressing plant and come out on CD, and then it'll be remastered for radio and things like that. So the whole process takes about a year. Meanwhile, I won't sort of do one project a year. I'll be working on 5 or 6 different ones of those at the same time simultaneously.
What's your experience working with actors? Because I imagine recordings you might get actors who say, can we say this very differently?
Yeah, I mean, the thing to do, if you are fortunate enough to be invited to a set, or you are fortunate enough to direct your own work, or whatever, I think that the important thing is to not be too precious about it. Yes, you should retain your, the story and things like that, but it is entirely possible that an actor might find it more comfortable, or to say a line a different way around, just to reverse some words, or they might think of a gag that might work, or something that will make it clearer. Because actors, they're not all stupid, just some of them. And they will, there's a reason why you hire good actors. That's because you think they can bring something to your script, and a good actor will be able to make your script even better. So it's not a conflict. They won't necessarily be fighting it. It won't be you against them. So be flexible enough for an actor to say, actually, I don't think I need to say that line at all, because either in a film thing they can say, I can do it with a look, or in a radio thing they might say, I think that you've already said that earlier, we don't necessarily need that line, I can put it into the previous line, the kind of emotion that I'm feeling. And that's good, be flexible, take it. My basic policy is that I only ever want to work with people who are better than me, who can do things that I can't do. There are an awful lot of people who like to work with people who they feel that they will be top dog. That's actually counterproductive. If you think about it, and someone said, okay, here's your script, and we can give you Ian McKellen, or we can give you your mate who's not terribly good, who you once worked with in a student theatre production, and you think, well, I'm better than the person I used to work with in student theatre production, so I'll be superior, I'll get him. That's a stupid way of doing it. You should get Ian McKellen, who's better than either of you. So you should always try and work with people who can do things that you can't do, who are better than you, because that way your work will be better. If you work with people who are mediocre, your work will be dragged down. So always try and work with people who are better than you. If you can do what they can do, then do it. Don't hire them to do the same thing that you can do. Hire people who can do things better than you can do. So if you are in a fortunate position to be able to hire them, always do that. It's always better to work with someone who's better than you are than to work with someone who's not as good as you are.
I suppose then, for example, just referring back to this, because you're writing science fiction for audio, you're almost nerdless. So I suppose, in terms of creativity, audio is perhaps the best thing to go for because there's no budget restrictions. You can practically go anywhere.
Yeah, but within reason, it has to be comprehensible. I had a script that came in that had sort of someone saying, you know, and then they go into an arena filled with 20,000 aliens from different races, and one of them, and they enter the arena mounted on a giant bat creature, firing lightsabers. I think that's not going to translate. Although you have all the freedoms in the world to do something, you have to do it in a way that is comprehensible to the audience, and there's still the discipline of trying to make it come across. And in a sense, the more fantastic it is, the more difficult it is in order to sell it to people, to convince them that there are, you know, that's why it's not just a sort of process of someone yawning. That's why I've got bones cracking. That's why I've got skin stretching and things like that. Because they need to audibly hear that there are people transforming into something that isn't them. So, although science fiction and things like that, and fantasy seem like it's an endless chocolate box of great things that you can do, in order to do it well, or in order to do it adequately, you have to really sell it and make sure that it works and exists and has a logic to it and is comprehensible to people who don't exist in your mind. I've worked with a brilliant writer, and he's a brilliant writer, but obviously sometimes there are sort of bits that I see and I say to him, why does this happen? And he'll always say, oh, it's because this, that, and that. And I go, that's great, but I don't know that, and the audience don't know that. So you need to add a line in that says that. And you'll always know in his head, because he'll have created the whole thing in his head. You must be prepared for people who don't have your vision in your head, and make it clear to them exactly what's happening at any one time. Otherwise, the possibilities that they will get it wrong are legion. And you do sometimes get, I'm sure you've seen films, and you've gone to plays, and you've seen television series where people seem to be doing a performance that is at odds with the dialogue. And if you sat down and just read the dialogue, you think, actually, why are they doing it like that? And that's frequently because the writer won't have made it clear exactly what kind of a character it is. And you can help yourself by making it clear, and then that actor will do the performance that you want them to do, regardless of what the director says, because they'll know what it is. And it's everything, the script writing is the most important thing on anything. That's where a hell of a lot of Hollywood has gone wrong, is that they have dismissed scripts thinking that it's about the visuals. It isn't. It's about the words. It's about the stories that you tell. And that is of vital importance. If you get a good script, you can have an average director and an average cast, and you'll still get a great end result. If you have a poor script, it doesn't matter how much Jerry Bruckheimer is producing your film. It'll still be crap, because they won't have paid any attention to the script. So you guys need to make sure, if you're doing scripts, or if you're choosing scripts, if you're producing them or whatever, that the script is the most important thing. Get that right, and you're 90% there.
Could you let people know perhaps about your own audio company, Text?
Well, I have I'm assuming there's audio stuff generally is divided into two things. There's this kind of thing, which is like a radio play, where you've got a full cast doing things, and then there's a sort of audio books, which are people narrating an entire book, reading it from start to finish, or reading an abridged version of it. But I sort of saw a middle ground, which was where you could have the unabridged text read by a great actor, but you could put sound effects and music underneath it in order to just bring it to life. And I started initially doing that with poetry titles, not putting music under the poetry, but sort of setting the scene, having a musical introduction, which then gave you a feel for the poem, and then the poem came out after. And then I also did it with sort of horror short stories and things like that, ghost stories, Dickens ghost stories, and Edgar Allan Poe, people like that. with the sound effects underneath it, and the actor will, when it comes to a dialogue, so they'll go, and he said, and then they will do the full voice, so they'll do effectively a full performance. So I've got sort of people who do lots of different accents, like Martin Jarvis and Miriam Margolyes and people like that, John Sessions and people to do these kind of things, and then they come out and put all the effects on it. So it's quite a labour-intensive process, far longer process than doing sound audio, but it brings it to life in a way that you can't get with either a full cast thing or with a thing. So it's I'm trying to create my own genre here, which is yeah. I'll let you know when I get rich from it. Okay, brilliant. Is this one that I do?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the very first one that we did where I was experimenting with it. So it's me reading some poems by Edward Thomas, who was a First World War poet. So this is like a trailer with bits of the poems.
This is no case of petty right or wrong that politicians or philosophers can judge. Yes, I remember Adelstrup, the name, because one afternoon of heat, the express train drew up there unwontedly. Rain, midnight rain, nothing but the wild rain on this bleak hut, and solitude, and me, remembering again that I shall die. Now first, as I shut the door, I was alone in the new house, and the wind began to moan. I love Rose. The goddesses that dwell far along, invisible, are my favorite gods. How weak and little is the light, all the universe of sight, love and delight, before the might, if you love it not, of night. Edward Thomas, Selected Poems, read by Barnaby Edwards. Visit textbookstuff.com to find out more.
So these poems are all available on sort of iTunes and Amazon.com and things like that, and they're available to download like music tracks. So if you like Adelstrup, which is one of the poems there, you can download that individual thing, and it'll start with a little sort of underneath the sort of me saying Adelstrup by Edward Thomas. It'll start with a little piece of music which will set the scene, and maybe some sound effects, like there's one called the owl, so you have like an owl noise. So it'll give you that thing, and then that'll fade away before the poem starts, so you get the pure poem, as it were. But again, as I was saying about the stage directions, I've sort of planted it in your head, the feeling that you're going to get from it, without sort of swathing underneath it. Because I don't really like putting loads of music underneath the poem, because I don't like being told how to react to it, but you can sort of just push people in the right direction. This is sad, or this is exciting, or this is whatever. But with the short stories, that's fully fully sort of orchestrated underneath the composer and sound effects and things like that. And it really does. There are trailers and things on YouTube, so you can have a check out and see what you think of them. But that again sort of brings it to life a bit more.
So where do you record these?
I have a home studio, so I do my own one at the home studio, but I do London recording studio, the same place that I work with Big Finish. I tend to work there, or another studio.
And how many actual releases, how many sort of audiobooks or poems, how many CDs have you released?
Well, so none of these ones come out on CD, because I looked into the whole. It's weird. Some people collect CDs and some people don't. And the company that I did the Doctor Who's with, they always release it on CD, because Doctor Who fans tend to be the kind of people who would like to have a physical copy of it. But in the world of audiobooks generally, it's pretty much all download. So my company, Textbook Stuff, is all download. But each release, the poetry releases are between 90 minutes and 120 minutes, and those ghost stories and things like that are really between 2 hours and 3 hours, something like that. And the poems usually have maybe, well, it depends how long the poems are. I did a Robert Browning collection with Martin Jarvis. One of those poems on its own is 30 minutes long, a single poem. So I did maybe 12 or 15 poems there. But I did a Bronte collection with me and Miriam Margolyes reading those, and that was 40 poems, and it's the same length as the other one, so it depends on the length of the poems. But they're all as individual tracks, so you can just buy the album like kind of music album.
As you mentioned, was it one poem, 30 minutes? Did you say?
Yeah.
regardless. How long will that take to record, the logistics?
So the logistics of recording an entire poetry collection, so a 2-hour release, will be one day in the studio. You just have to rely on the actors being really good. So that's 2 hours. That's a sort of ratio of about 3 to 1, so they can have 3 retakes and then that's it, as it were. But sometimes they don't need it. We did Miriam Margolyes reading Christina Rossetti, and she did the whole of Goblin Market, which I don't know if you know, it's a very long poem, and I think it's about 27 minutes long. And she did the whole of it in one take, with only 4 tiny mistakes, which we went back and just picked up, which is amazing when you hear it. But she knew the poem practically off by heart, so that was good. And Martin Jarvis did the same thing with the Pied Piper of Hamelin, because he was very familiar with it. But yeah, it's tricky to sustain a long poem like that. You just have to rely on, as I said, working with people who are infinitely better than you are. That's why you hire them. There's no point in hiring a dog and then barking yourself. You need to hire something better.
Considering probably most people here are interested in media and working in that field, how would you recommend stuff like Twitter, uploading your own stuff onto YouTube? How do you get your work out there noticed?
I think it is, the world has changed, and it's not necessarily changed for the worse, it's not necessarily changed for the better, but the world has certainly changed in the last 10 years, since you guys have been in your lifetimes. And you have to embrace it, I think. I think it is important to have a social media existence, and if you want to get your work out there. And I know a lot of people who make their own little films and then they promote them and push them onto YouTube. There's a guy that you know called Charlie McDonnell, who is he's called Charlie Is So Cool Like, and he started his own. When he was about 15, he started his own YouTube channel, and just doing silly little videos of himself, and then he started doing sort of comedy routines and creative things and dares and things like that. And from that basis, he now has 2 million Twitter followers. Apple sent him every product for free. He gets flown around the world to do these things. He has his own pop band, and he's presented stuff for the BBC, entirely based on him creating his own product, his own USP, as it were, himself. Literally in his bedroom, literally with like a little camera on his phone or on his computer, and creating his own videos and just trying to be experimental. And he built that up, and he has a Twitter following of whatever, and he got Stephen Fry to record opening things, sort of all the voiceovers for his stuff, entirely based on creating it at home and creating it himself. And it's not a new phenomenon. Spike Lee did the same thing with his first movie. He bought a load of credit cards, took out the maximum amount of debt you can on every credit card, made his own movie, and if it failed, he would then be declared bankrupt. But it wasn't. It was a success, and he managed to do it like that. So I think I'd always recommend, if you're feeling creative, don't wait for people to come around and find you, knock on their doors, or do it yourself. Make a version of it. If you've got a script, get some friends who can, you think can act, shoot it on your phone or whatever, and create it, make it yourself. And the more you do that, the more people will notice it, and the more they will. That's a way in of getting into work that way. So yeah, I think you've got to be proactive. There are no sort of jobs just waiting for you. There are people waiting to hear from you. And the way you have your calling card is to send them a little video, to send them a script that you've done, to whatever. And it doesn't matter when you're first, you will always meet, and I'm sure you've met loads of people who go, yes, well, I'm writing a novel. And you say, that's brilliant, okay, when's it coming out, when you're sort of releasing it? And they'll go, oh, well, it's just, it's still very much in my head, or I've got this, or I'd love to write a little sort of play, for a one-handed play, I'd love to do that. And you think, do it, don't say you'd love to do it, do it. It might be terrible, you won't know until you've done it, but you will learn an awful lot doing it, and then the next one will be better than the one you did before. But if you never have that first time, if you always just are waiting for you to write your Citizen Kane, you'll probably be waiting a long time. Write a load of rubbish Citizen Kanes before you write a Citizen Kane, because it's just like any other discipline. It's practice. The more you write, the better you'll become at it, the more you'll learn from your mistakes, and the more you'll be able to sort of move on and then create little tiny things, short films, short stories, whatever you want to do. Do that, and then you will learn from those, and then you'll build, and they will be sort of, it's like when if you're a painter or whatever like that, it's like having a portfolio before you do an exhibition in order to show people what kind of stuff you can do. Because I could come to you and say, I'm a brilliant, fantastic writer, or I'm a fantastic actor, or whatever like that. And unless you've seen me act, unless you've read something I've written, you've just got my word for it. So do have something to show people and to learn from yourself.
Because it doesn't hurt either to ask, because I got Barney into it through Twitter. I just asked on the off chance he'd be interested, and he did. So it's like, there's so much availability of it, there's so much access to these writers and actors who are on Twitter. So it is that, I suppose it's a much more open book with, for example, the Twitter generation, you can tweet anyone and they can tweet you back possibly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I've got certainly half a dozen jobs off Twitter entirely. 2 films off Twitter. And I've got writing jobs and stuff like that off Twitter from people who don't know me, who said, and then they'll find me on Twitter, things like that. So it sounds ridiculous, but it is a great tool for you. It's a great calling card, as is your own website. You've got stuff. It's a great idea to have your own website, simply so that when someone says, when you say, hello, my name's Alice, which is your name, isn't it? Yeah. So when they say that, and I say, that's great, I wonder if I'll look her up on Google, and I type your name in, and your website will come up. And it may just be a page saying, media student doing this, doing that, something like that. But that will be, you'll have an existence online. You'll have someone can check you, or you'll have a YouTube account with a little video that you made, a little sort of 2-minute video that you made, and you think that's great. And you'll have a presence there. You'll have an existence that people can check up on, because no one knows who you are, and you need to create who you are, and then someone will find. Then you can say, "This is who I am," and they'll find you, and they'll either like you or they won't like you, and then they can do something. It's your calling card. A CV is no longer enough. You need to think about a multimedia CV.
So what acting jobs did you get through Twitter?
I got a film called Shadows of a Stranger, which is have you seen what's not Dark City? What's the Sin City? Have you seen that? It's everyone filmed against green screen, and then they create all the stuff. It's these 2 guys who are probably no older than you, who decided that they wanted to make a motion picture, and they wanted to do it like this. So they built a green screen studio in their shed, in a sort of shed at the bottom of their garden, or a barn at the bottom of their garden. And they just contacted actors on Twitter and said, look, here's a little promo that we've done, which was some actors as a green screen, and then they got a computer to create the whole world behind that. And they approached me, so they've got an actor called Colin Baker, they've got Colin McFarlane, they've got Sarah Jane Honeywell, they've got a lot of sort of minorish people who've done stuff, and so they've got a complete cast of people, and it's coming out next year. It's going to be a 90-minute feature film that 2 guys wrote and directed, produced, did all the effects for, and it's coming out and it's hitting festivals next year. It can be done. And so they approached me on Twitter, and I got that. And I did a comedy short for called The Plotters, which was about the gunpowder plot, which I think you've got.
Yeah, sure.
So I did, again, that was approached via Twitter. Someone said, would you like to come and, are you in London next week for a day? We'd love you to play one of the gunpowder plotters in this little comedy short for Virgin Shorts. They then entered this thing in with an open competition for everyone. It then got shortlisted, and it is now in every single picture house cinema in the country. For the next 6 months or maybe a year, it will be shown. It's getting all of this. They've got IMDb listings, and all of this based on them just saying, we've got a comedy, 2-minute comedy thing that we'd like to do. Let's invite some actors to do it, whether they'd like to do it, film it, shoot it themselves, do the post-production themselves, put it out there, enter a competition, and they pretty much won it. And they're now getting interest to do TV series based on this. So you have to do these kind of things. Don't feel afraid of it. The only failure that you will ever do in life is not doing something. That's the only thing you'll ever regret. I know that sounds like such a rubbish platitude, and all your parents have told you that, and all your friends have told you that. But really, when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, the only power you have in the industry is to say no to something. You can very rarely make anything happen. So if you get offered something you don't want to do, just say no. And the only sort of thing you'll ever regret at the end of your lives is having not done something. Just try it. It doesn't matter if you fail. It's no big deal. It's far better to fail at something than to try and succeed the whole time. Because if you are a constant success, the pressure builds up, and you get like Stanley Kubrick, where you feel you can't make any more movies because you've made such amazing movies that you then take the gaps between your things, or you get like Kate Bush, and the gaps between your albums get bigger and bigger and bigger because you're so afraid of doing something that's not utterly perfect. Just do it. It doesn't matter. Do what Woody Allen did. Make some rubbish movies, make some brilliant movies, but just keep making movies. It's just keep running. Don't if you stop running, or if you stop swimming, treading water, you just sink. Just keep moving like a shark. The Plotters, there we are. So I'm the one who says, have you got another hat? That's how to identify me, because we all look the same.
Does backlights go on?
There you go.
This is the real deal. Virgin Media Shorts gives new filmmakers a chance to show their work right here on the big screen. Enjoy.
Gentlemen, we are in court. 36 barrels of gunpowder currently reside underneath the House of Lords. Tomorrow, when the heretic king takes his seat, Robert will ignite the gunpowder. Boom! Will ignite a new dawn. Robert, would you like to say a few words?
No, Guy, I'm Thomas. That's Robert.
Ah, yes, Robert, our explosives expert.
What? I'm Robert Catesby? You mean that Robert?
Huh? Well, we've got two Roberts.
3.
Who are you?
Robert Keys.
And you're the explosives expert.
Good Lord, no.
It is a bit confusing. Probably doesn't help that we all look a bit alike. Well, if you like, I could pop home and get another hat.
Have you got another hat?
Look, we just need to know which one of you three is the explosives expert. No, look, it's not difficult. All we need is one of you to go down there and set light to the gunpowder.
I would do it, but I'm known for the Devereux Rebellion. I never get past the guards.
Bad knee. Can't run. It'd be suicide, and that's a mortal sin.
Fine. Anyone else? Thomas, are you man enough?
Which Thomas?
What?
There's Thomas Percy, Thomas Winter, and Thomas Bates.
Oh, what? Really? Well, we got 3 Roberts and 3 Thomases.
And 2 Johns. I do it myself, but I'm driving the getaway carriage.
Only need one of you. Look, really, I'll do it myself if I have to. Fine, I will. I know, if you want something done properly, do it yourself.
He's given us a description of the other conspirators.
Fetch me the thumb screws.
For more information and to see more short films, visit virginmediashorts.co.uk. Virgin Media Shorts, championing undiscovered talent.
So that's a couple of guys thinking that would be a funny idea for a sketch. They just made it. They hired some costumes. They got some rubbish beards from a sort of local joke shop, and we cut them all off and did them like that. Took us about a day to film, and they then spent maybe 2 or 3 weeks in post-production. They got a friend who works on TV to do the CGI London at the opening shot, and then they just entered a competition. So it's entirely possible. It cost them £1,000, the whole thing. And they're now getting a serious interest for doing a sitcom, well, not a sitcom, a sketch show, and some other sort of movie stuff. So it can be done.
That's familiar. I think I've heard that. So you have done as well Doctor Who. obviously inside the Daleks, but you've been with Chris Pratt and David Tennant and Matt Smith.
Yeah, so in the audio series I've done everything from Doctor Who number 4, Tom Baker. I've done every Doctor right up until that.
So you worked with a lot of actors and the Doctors.
Yes.
Now, could you let people know how you became involved in Doctor Who?
Well, again, that's another thing that will happen definitely in all of your careers. You can't plan it. It'll be random. One day someone will ask you something and you'll say yes, and that will change your life path. And it won't be Jimmy Savile asking that question. But it'll be, someone approached me. I went to drama school with another actor, lots of actors, another actor called Nicholas Pegg, who happened to know the people who were writing Doctor Who magazine. And the 30th anniversary of Doctor Who came up in 1993, and the BBC said it was something called 30 Years in the TARDIS, which was a sort of celebration and recreation of great scenes from Doctor Who, with new shot stuff. And they spoke to Doctor Who magazine and said, we're going to be doing this. Do you happen to know anyone who's cheap, who could play, who's really tall? And the person I knew at drama school knew someone at Doctor Who magazine. Doctor Who magazine said, yes, we know this guy called Nicholas Pegg. He's 6'3". He then came in as a cyber leader for whole sequences, and they said, next week it's Daleks. Do you know anyone from drama school? He then knew me. He then said, do you want to come in, do some Daleks in BBC Doctor Who? I said, fabulous. And that was in 1993. I did that. That was great, fabulous. Forgot about it. And then randomly, through a completely different connection, got involved with the audio series. But when they brought the new TV series back, they looked at the list on the BBC and said, who's done Dalek operating before, who isn't 90 years old and in a mental home? And my name was there, so they phoned me up and said, would you like to come back and do Daleks for TV Doctor Who? And I said, yep. And I've been doing them for it's about like maybe a month a year, but I've been doing them for 8 years now. I've flown around the world based on that, gone to conventions in America and things like that. And it's entirely random. It's entirely down to the fact that I happened to be at drama school with one guy who was 6'3", who happened to know another person who wrote for a magazine, and that's what it was. And that has opened so many doors to me. So that's the kind of thing that will definitely happen to all of you. You will get these random moments where you can't predict what's going to happen. Be open to them. I thought it was like a fun idea to go and be a Dalek on Westminster Bridge, and that has led to defining an awful lot of my career. And it is weird. And again, recently, about 2 years ago, I was at the Shakespeare's Globe. I did a season at Shakespeare's Globe, and the reason I got that job was that it was a remount of the Globe's most successful show, which was The Merry Wives of Windsor, and they phoned my agent, who happened to have one of the clients who'd done it before, and they said, is that client available? My agent said, I'm terribly sorry, he's doing another show in the West End, but why don't you see Barnaby? And they went, okay, whatever. So I then went in and did the audition, and obviously I wasn't appalling, I didn't stab anyone to death in the audition. So I managed to get the audition. But it was entirely random because my agent had said, they phoned up someone else and my agent said, they're not available, try this person. And then I get a fantastic 7 months work of the Globe. It then goes to New York. Tom Hanks produces it in Santa Monica, Dustin Hoffman's theatre. It was like a dream come true. It was amazing. And again, it's entirely random through one phone call, someone not being available and me just being there. So this is going to happen the whole time. You can't predict what you're going to do, but just be open to it. If it sounds like a good idea, go for it.
Got a clip of you being
King of the Daleks.
Yes, that happened as well. Just so
what's this from? Is this
Asylum.
Right, this is the latest one from the start of the new current series of Doctor Who as Daleks. This is what we're teaching other people how to operate Daleks.
Yes.
This is definitely the most Daleks involved story ever.
It looks amazing. And we have like all sorts of Daleks from all sorts of eras. So many Daleks.
And because obviously there are so many Daleks, I mean there are millions and millions of Daleks in the episode, so we had to build a lot of them from scratch.
We've had to make 8 bronze Daleks. Then there's a Dalek which has a cracked head. It's 9. Not really. We start with the Dalek moulds. The Dalek is built from sections, so everything's produced in fiberglass, and then it's cleaned up. Those will go off, and then they'll be trimmed, and then they'll be sanded and finished. We stack all our components up, and then they'll be sprayed those typical Dalek colours, the bronze, and then they'll be dried and fed back for final assembly.
The Crimson
of all Daleks. We rebuilt the modern Daleks.
This is a massive Dalek story, so we needed to train up a whole load more operators. So when you break in a new Dalek operator, you'll take the top off and you'll sit them inside their Dalek so they can get a feel for actually moving it along and heading forward, and then we'll gradually encase them in more fiberglass until the prison is complete. Once you put these things on, you can't actually see anything, you can't see the base of the Dalek at all, so you've got no sense of how big your Daleks are. If you want to experience what a Dalek's like, sit on an office chair with a dustbin on your head for 6 hours, and you've pretty much got it. And obviously once you've been in there for hours now, then the natural character of hating all of humanity just comes really naturally to you. There is a shot where I say, I'm not looking for a countermeasure here, I'm looking for reverse, and then the Dalek scoots back. We had a couple of tests. I think it was at that point that it was decided that I would not be in it. Okay, thank you very much. And I was very happy for that decision. And they had a massive explosion in the hip.
Today we are blowing up a Dalek. This is an original Dalek that we've adapted, and this is a mortar pot, which is what we put our explosive charge in. What it does is just contains the explosive force, so if I put this water pot in, that then will blow the front of the Dalek out.
I don't know how many litres of petrol, but it was a lot. None of us were allowed in the studio because it was such a huge, big, great explosion.
Part of the life cycle of any Dalek is that it gets blown up. That's what we do with Daleks. We blow them up.
Blowing up in the Dalek, what more can you say? This is sort of one of my favourite moments in video games, to blow up hundreds of Daleks.
Yeah, it's a tough job. Yeah, I think if you explain to my 8-year-old self that he was one day going to be a Dalek, he would be melted. Yeah, so no, that's just as a large, it is a large show to work on. This is getting myself into exciting stuff. Yeah, well, my task for 8 years has been trying to kill the Doctor. I've shot him once, but I've never quite managed to. It always blows me up in the end.
I suppose it's quite nice to also know some actors they'll appear in a show and they'll be just one of it, can never come back, but you can come back and see different actors take a role with different guest actors.
Yeah, it is very good because you get that simultaneous thing of sort of the work and anonymity, which is really lovely. I'd hate to be sort of so. I wouldn't like to have. I mean, I know people do in EastEnders, and they can't walk into pubs because people think they're the characters from EastEnders, and they treat them like the characters from EastEnders. And if that person's been unfaithful to his girlfriend, they do literally spread it around. I've seen it happen. It's horrible. But practically no one knows who I am, which is brilliant. And I can move effortlessly through things. And sometimes I want to sort of name drop. But sometimes I'll go out to dinner or something with David Tennant, and he'll have to put his back to the restaurant, and he'll have to find a dark corner, and still people will find him and ask for his autograph and things like that. And he's brilliant. He's so lovely, but he can't lead a normal life. So I'm immensely fortunate that I work and I can lead a perfectly normal life, or an abnormal life.
Do you ever get recognised on the street?
Very occasionally. Normally there's a sort of cadre of Doctor Who fans who know which particular bald person I am, who works on Doctor Who, because everyone who works in the Daleks is usually bald. When I was doing Merry Wives of Windsor, it went to New York, and the New York premiere was brilliant because there were about 15 autograph hunters outside, and there weren't many more famous people in the cast than I. And they, at the end of the show, they came out, and all the autograph hunters were for me. They were all Dalek fans, so I felt quite good. So we, Barney, we stuff the Barney, we just so it's good. So yeah, it is an immensely sort of egotistical and privileged thing to do.
So what else have you got planned perhaps for the next year?